Okie dokie. Oh,
Yay.
about to go live. That's very exciting. Hurrah. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Digital Picnic through 1719. I'm Lily Daniels, and today we're celebrating International Women's Day. We're lucky enough to have Nancy Revell with us today. Say hello, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
Nancy's a Sunday Times best-selling author of a series of books called The Shipyard Girls. You can't see that at all, it's too bright in here, but they're lovely books, which charts the lives and loves of an eclectic group of women who worked in the Sunderland shipyards during World War II. So we're thrilled to have you here today, Nancy, for what we've called International Women's Day, even though that was Monday.
Well, we can kind of have the whole week, I think. A day's not quite enough to celebrate the wonderfulness of women throughout the ages.
Exactly, and I think it is also Women's History Month this month, so we can get away with talking about women all the time during March.
Yeah, perfect.
If you're a fan of International Gendered Days, we also have a digital picnic from last year's International Men's Day, which will be in our archive, so you can have a look at that and listen to a great discussion from the late Councillor Jeff Walker and Kieran Brady, and our mixing volunteer today, Alex Clark, who we will miss throughout the talk. We had wondered how we would manage to get football in the conversation, because that's his modus operandi. So I will try and bring up football on his behalf.
Oh no, no doubt.
Even though I don't understand it. I don't.
No.
We'll start with a nice easy question, Nancy. What have you got for lunch? What have you got for your dinner?
Oh, I'm not a very good dinner lunch person. I'm a bit naughty. Chocolate is a little bit chocolate and coffee. It's not very nutritious, is it at all? But yes, but I do it very well on an evening.
Well, my lunch is the same. I've had a Nutella sandwich. I'm very proud of it. I refuse to be ashamed of my delicious Nutella sandwich.
My chocolate for a Nutella sandwich, because that sounds much nicer. Yes.
I suppose at least it's got like 2 food groups.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's a balanced diet. So one of the reasons that we're really excited to talk to you, Nancy, is that these books that you've written, one is coming out next week.
Yes.
On the 18th, is that right?
Yes, on the 18th, yes.
So lovely to hear that someone's been doing some work.
Wow.
In this time. Were you writing the last installation in lockdown?
Well, I write a book every 6 months, so I've written a few books now in during COVID, and I'll be honest, for me personally, it hasn't been that much different in the fact that, you know, I work from home, and I do tend to sort of go to ground a little bit when I start to write a book. So I do kind of a self-imposed sort of lockdown, and have been for the past 5 years. So I'm kind of quite used to it, but I have to say I am sort of really now just like everybody dying to get out and get back to some semblance of normality. But yeah, so I've written a few books during lockdown now. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm blown away by that. Your research that you take on for these historic novels, how has that changed from I imagine pre-lockdown there might have been more tea and coffee, more visits to places.
Yes. Yes, there would have been a bit more sort of physical actually going out, and especially at the beginning of the series, which was obviously way before this awful virus came along. You know, I was sort of going out to places and going out to interview people, and I was really lucky in the fact that I did manage to interview some women who had been real life shipyard workers during the war. So that was absolutely fab, yes, which is something I just simply wouldn't have been able to do now. So yes, it was a lot more that physical sort of research as well, and actually going to the museum and going to libraries. But once that sort of intensity had been sort of done over the first sort of year or two, it's eased off a little bit. It was a very steep learning curve to start with. Yes. So I'm glad I managed to get all of that in, to be honest with you, before we got to this stage of sort of living in a bubble, really.
Yeah. What was it like interviewing those women?
It was incredible, actually. The first woman that I interviewed was it was uncanny, actually, because she started to tell me her story about working in one of the shipyards, and she had been taken on as a French polisher, and she'd got the job through her family, which is what I found out a lot of people tended to do, male and female. They tended to come into the shipyards through their families. And obviously, a lot of the women, I later found out, had to actually go to the labour exchange and do it that way, especially when they needed a lot. But with Joan, she's a lovely woman called Joan Tate. She had got her job through her father, and she, when she was chatting, I was just sort of listening to her thinking, gosh, she's my Polly character. I have a character in the books called Polly, and she goes to the shipyards to work, and she falls in love, which is exactly what happened with Joan. Joan met her future husband there and stayed happily married to him for like decades, and they had children and grandchildren. So yes, it was really nice, and I was really pleased to hear that my imaginings about what it would be like during the war to work in the shipyard were pretty much on the mark with regard to sort of the sense of friendship and the kind of the camaraderie that was happening at that time. That really came across. I mean, immediately that we started talking about her work at that time, her face sort of, lit up, and you could just see she had really enjoyed her time there. And I found that with other people that I spoke to as well, sort of after that the sort of whole demeanour sort of became lighter and more jovial. And I think there was only one recording that I listened to of somebody who had gone into the shipyards, and you could tell she just hadn't enjoyed it. But out of all of those people, the same sort of essence of feeling like they were doing something really worthwhile, something different, something quite liberating, really. And I think this is sort of the interesting thing with it being sort of International Women's Day, and in generally just sort of to celebrate sort of women's liberation in all ways, even now. I think they felt a sense of liberation because it was really the first time that they, first of all, had been allowed to go out and do a man's job. I mean, up to that stage in the shipyards, it was just women just would not have been allowed, tolerated. There was the odd one that worked in the shipyards, I've since found out, but that really was, quite an anomaly for that to be. And then all of a sudden, these women were given this freedom. So it was always this terrible time, and the war was on, and there was a rationing, and there was insecurity, and there was people suffering bereavement. But overall, there was a huge liberation for women. They were earning their own money. They were actually, they were deciding what to do with that pay packet themselves 9 out of 10 times, because normally the man would have been dealing with all of that. And when obviously the men, most of them were away. So all of a sudden the woman found herself with all these other things that she hadn't kind of been allowed to do. Or it hadn't been expected of her to do that. So yeah, really, really interesting. And I think that came through in a lot of the interviews, that it was that sense of, they didn't have to worry about the makeup. They just put their overalls on. They were working as a team. They were making new friends with other women. Yes, so a real sense of friendship, unity and camaraderie.
It must have been really fascinating to hear from someone who, because I'm trying to imagine that you're going into these interviews to find out the facts and to get inspired, and then to realize, oh, I've written this.
Yeah, yes. And you know what? She wasn't the only woman either, because I never got to speak to her because she's no longer here, but a lovely woman called Meg Hartford, who helps me sometimes with the research, a particular sort of, parts that I need to find out and I'm struggling with. She's absolutely brilliant. You know, she just immediately seems to sort of, you know, find out that moment and sort of emails it to me. But anyway, she told me about her auntie, who really resembles one of the characters as well, and actually went to work as a riveter. And anybody who knows anything about shipbuilding, which I didn't before I started all of this, but will know that that's a really, really hardcore job. You know, that is really hard work. And so yeah, that was really great. So it was just like, wow, so that's my Martha. So, you know, I feel like I've met a real life Polly, and I've heard about a real life Martha who really did do a man's job. And her story was actually really really sad. Gosh, I'm just trying to remember her name. That's terrible. But Meg's auntie, her beloved, her fiance, was killed, and she was working in bins at the time, which was the store, the main store, and you know, so it was a very sort of, you know, female-driven job. And when she heard that the person that she loved and was going to marry had been killed in action, she ended that job, and it was a case of, I want to do something that feels like I'm really doing something to help win this war. And she went and worked in the shipyards as a riveter. And I just think, oh, you know, that makes my sort of, you know, that makes me tingle, you know, to think of that kind of resolution, determination, and kind of doing something really out of a horrible, negative awfulness. She did something really proactive and really positive. So wow, you know, incredible women.
Incredible women. I've got so many questions. Number one, did you say French polisher earlier?
Yes, yes. Well, that was.
What does that mean?
Well, that's sort of wood and that polishing wood basically, and working, yeah, working more within the innards of the ships. I must admit, most of the women that I did research worked on the actual sort of metal work and the vessels themselves, and did sort of more sort of labour intensive jobs to a certain extent. You know, there was the welding, there was the riveting, there was the labouring, there was something called red leaders, which I mentioned in the books, as just sort of, you know, passing as part of the sort of the landscape of the shipyards. And they painted the ships with a sort of an anti-corrosive that was red. So they were always sort of speckled in this sort of red paint, you know. But it was also, we now know that was also very toxic. So they were breathing in, you know, something that might well have caused them problems in later life. Yeah. So it
sounds like a tongue twister.
Yeah, so incredible sort of variety of jobs that they did. And of course, you know, the women were in the offices as well and worked as one of my characters works as a draftsman / woman. And obviously there was contometers, which is basically accountancy, and typists. So they went through the whole spectrum of the workforce really within the shipyards.
Just incredible. I think I read somewhere that the seed of this idea came from your husband asking if women worked on the shipyards.
Yes.
It's so fascinating to me because you have sort of brought to life this whole world, but one that, I mean, did you know the answer? Did you know if women worked on the shipyard?
No, I was terrible actually. Yes, and it's interesting that you read that article. I read that a while ago when I first started writing the series, and yes, it still makes me chuckle now really. So we were sort of, you know, we were sat having a chat, and I was saying, well, you know, I've been asked to come up with an idea that's set in this saga genre, and it's sort of historical and set perhaps during World War One or World War Two. And you know, I was chatting and I said, oh, you know, I'd love it to be in Sunderland, because I've always said, you know, I've wanted to write or set a novel in Sunderland. And I said, I've always been interested in World War II, so that would definitely, you know, be the time. I said, but really, you know, I said, well, Sunderland, shipyards, and I was thinking, obviously, the mines as well, but I felt like there'd been quite a lot written about sort of mining in the area. And I said about the shipyards, and obviously a lot of male, a lot of the men in my family worked in the shipyard, so I sort of knew a little bit in passing about it. And that's when Paul said to me, he said, well, you know, and my immediate reaction was, no, of course they didn't, you know, don't be daft. And then I sort of stopped myself and I thought, oh, well, I wonder. And that's how it came about. And this is why I get quite passionate about making people aware that they did work there, is that, you know, I sort of trundled back home and, you know, did the usual, went onto Google and put sort of women, shipyards, World War II. And and I did loads of the sort of searches and nothing came up bar this one article from a wonderful woman who I've spoken to since called Angela Stevenson. And she had written this article about women who worked in the shipyard during World War II. And it was her grandmother that worked as a contometer there at the Thompsons. So I read this article and there was this wonderful picture of this woman in a crane in her overalls driving this crane. And I was like, wow, you know, and I was, but also I was a bit perplexed that why aren't there loads more articles? Why aren't there books that I can buy about this? So and that's where that's where it came from. So it ended up being two things really. One, yeah, what a brilliant idea, and now I've got my three components for this series, and I can get about sort of, you know, thinking of characters, and I'm going to have them working in the shipyards during the war at Sunderland. But there was another part of me felt very outraged that, you know, these Sunderland women and women throughout the country had been totally ignored and haven't been given any kind of pat on the back, commendation for what they'd done. So there was that side as well. So I felt even more passionate about, you know, doing that particular story because I wanted to shout about it, you know, and say, you know, look, I wanted to write a great story and I wanted people to enjoy the story. But there was another part of me who was sort of
doing a little bit of justice.
Yeah, under their noses and saying, look, this might be fiction, but it did actually happen.
Amazing. We've got a question from Beverly Ann Hopper. Can I ask Amanda, after finishing the war years with the Shipyard Girls, can we expect more books about the girls after the war? And what happened to them all? Did they carry on working or settling? It would be fascinating to see how they coped into the 1950s. You must feel like a tremendous sense of responsibility for these characters. You've been with them for a while now. You've seen them through almost an entire war.
Yeah.
How are you going to handle them coming out of it?
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing. I mean, the series officially finishes on the 12th book, which will take the women up to the end of the war. So it'll take us up to VE Day, 1945. So this book that's out, just about to come out, that's sort of set in 1944, sort of January to June, kind of ends around up the Normandy landings. The next one that I've just written, which is Shipyard Girls Under the Mistletoe, that takes the women right the way up and focuses more on the December period, 1945. And then the last one, which I'm just about to start writing, will take us up the last 6 months of the war. So I really don't know, because I must admit, I am somebody who writes very, I'm not the greatest plotter in the world. And I tend to sort of wing it quite a lot and just start writing and see kind of where it takes me. So I don't know, to be honest. Practically what I have found out is obviously most of the women did leave the shipyards when the war came back. And what is interesting, and also I would find a little bit annoying if I had been a woman at the time, that the women at the time had been given this nickname of dilutees. So if you imagine you're on squash and you dilute it,
Right.
So they were sort of saying the women's work was diluted, and that kind of explained why they didn't quite pay them so much. But it was really about enabling them to be replaced once the men came back. So a lot of the women did leave the shipyards when the war ended. There were some obviously that stayed. So it's going to be interesting. I think if I do continue the story in any way, it's going to have to go beyond the shipyards.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, Beverly, I don't know yet.
Fascinating. It's almost like it's not happened yet.
What do you, sorry, what do you mean? As in,
like that, because you don't know what's going to happen. It's like it's unraveling in
yeah,
real time.
yeah, and I think that's certainly how I write, and I think if I get a surprise, then I know my reader's going to get a surprise. So I like the thought of that. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Um, oh, Beverly said that you put your hometown of Sunderland back on the map with your books, and I think she's quite right that you're right that this is like you're uncovering some history here, and something that I know that you're quite passionate about is this representation of the Sunderland working women, and there's a plan for some monuments that you're interested in.
Yes, yes, there is. Yes. So I kind of have gotten my own way to a certain extent, but that hasn't been done alone. That has been very much as a team effort. And again, it brings us back to that whole sort of camaraderie, friendship, working together, and just kind of solidarity of women in the fact that I wrote the first book, and in the first book, I'm looking at, because I've got it on my shelf somewhere. I was given this sort of what they call it back matter, which sounds absolutely awful, but in the publishing world, it's called back matter. And basically, they give you free pages at the back to fill if you want. And I was told that I could do a dear reader, which is great. So I always do a dear reader and speak to my reader at the end of the book. And I was also given sort of about a page or two for history notes. So we're absolutely left on that. And in the first book, I sort of said, these women did exist. This is what they did. Oh, isn't it unbelievable that they've been ignored and that mentioned in our history books, and sort of wrote this in the history. I got a phone call shortly after that book was published by a wonderful woman called Sue Brown, who's part of Sir Optimus Sunderland. Now I didn't know what that organisation was at the time, but it's an organisation for women, and it's charitable, and they help other women both in Sunderland, this country, and abroad. And she said, gosh, you're right, this is amazing, I can't believe it, and she's a very educated woman herself, and she said, I have to admit that I didn't know either. So she kind of took the bull by the horns, got the Sir Optimus together, got funds, and went off to the council, and basically has got this statue in the making. And then what happened, which was even more exciting, was actually through Facebook. I put a shout out on Facebook saying, is there any sort of artists, sculptors out there who would want to be a part of a project to create this design, this project? And amazingly, we got an incredible artist called Roseanne Robertson, and she is, top of the tree. She is, next Barbara Hepworth. She's amazing. She is exhibited in all the main places. Her work is so groundbreaking. She's from Sunderland, and her work is just incredible. And to be honest with you, that would be something which I personally, I think if I was back in my journalistic days, I would be wanting to interview her about her work, because that is really about gender and women in today's society as well. So we got her, and she's doing it.
Amazing. That's so exciting, because there is that, we need to see these things. Is there anything that you've been able to put your finger on while you've been researching or writing for why we haven't celebrated these women?
I have to be a little bit careful with this, because I mean, I just think it's down to sexism, basically, and I think it's just down to that sort of society. I mean, I think we're very keen. I have a little bit of a bugbear. So in Sunderland, there are statues. There are many statues. There are no statues of women. There is one statue of a woman in Sunderland, and she's crying because she is representative of one of the many mums who lost their children in the terrible Victorian disaster of Victoria Hall. And I so that kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? You know, why haven't we, you know, I suppose my question would be battered back to say, well, why haven't we as a city got more statues of women? Because we've got plenty of women from Sunderland who certainly deserve a statue. There's Gertrude Bell, there's the Cook sisters, you know, there's our up to date. We've got these wonderful women footballers. You know, there's just a whole plethora of women out there that deserve a statue in Sunderland. So why aren't there? So I don't know. I have my own theories. I think women can be very much undervalued in society generally. So yeah, it's a huge question and a huge topic, I think. And I sorry, I think this is why Women's Day is really, really important, and the whole anything that brings women to the fore, because you know, we are and have been in history very much knocked back. And I have to say, you know, in the Northeast, that I think it is very prevalent. And I do think as women, we have to push that bit harder against that for whatever reasons. But I do feel that that is the case, and it's still a case, I hate to say.
I think it's yeah, you and I aren't going to have all the answers. If anyone wants to pop why they think
Yeah,
this is in the comments, then do go for it. But we are seeing more like celebration of women's contribution to work in cities. Like I'm thinking about there's a lovely monument to the steel workers in Sheffield.
yes,
and
yes.
An excellent monument to that Hazel Reeves made in Carlisle to the cracker makers. So these things are coming, and we can be part of it, or we can push against it. And I know which way I want to go.
Yeah, better late than never. But I will have to say though, also, you know, I do think we as a community and our council have to put money there as well, because I mean, that statue at Sheffield, actually, my old journalistic friend has written the book on them, and she was quite involved with that statue, from what I can gather. It's an amazing statue, but I think they had to sort of raise quite a lot of money for that, and the council put a lot of money, and I think it was thinking about £250,000. And I mean, to be fair, our statue is pennies. So what has been given to for our statue, I say our statue, you know, as I say,
our statue is right.
Yeah, is not a lot, to be fair. So especially when you look at the other statues that are going up around the Vaux site, because you see that woman's statue for the Shipyard women is which is hopefully going to go up at the end of the year. It was meant to be early because of COVID, but that is one of many that is going up around the old Vaux site, and I was very surprised, to be honest, that before the Shipyard women came along, there wasn't going to be yet again there wasn't going to be another statue of a woman on the Vaux site. The horse, there's going to be men, there's going to be boys, but there's no females. And so my question is, I think we need to start changing a little bit faster. You know, I'm talking about sort of sexism back in the 1940s, etc., 50s. We're in 2021 now, and yet we're still in this scenario where we're looking at not having any women on a huge site that is celebrating everything for Sunderland. What does that say to you?
We've just had a lovely comment from Jay Sykes about the lovely project from Sunderland Culture on the rebel women of Sunderland, and how pretty much all the women featured in that project are those statues, and we need to push harder and champion the presence of women's voices and contributions.
Yes.
Yes,
and I have to say, wow, that particular project, Rebel Women of Sunderland, is amazing, and I've had a little sort of interaction with them, and it was just a joy to see that, you know, when that was happening and what has been happening since then. And this is when I wish I could sort of pull up pictures and kind of fling them out, because there's another brilliant woman in Sunderland. In fact, strangely enough, it's Roseanne's sister, and she's called Catherine, and she does these wonderful illustrations. And I believe it was Catherine, of course, I hope I put this right, that did an illustration of one of the real shipyard women. Memory. And I featured her in the back of one of my books, and it's just great. It's kind of a modern take on this. Oh, fabulous! But if anybody's interested in seeing it, just go on to the Rebel Women, just look at it, and it'll bring up this wonderful illustration of
Pop a link in as well.
Yeah, with the woman welder.
Something that you and I were talking about earlier is how there is a bit of a barrier in gathering these stories from women, because they can sometimes feel like, oh, if I did it, it can't have been that important, or
Yes,
some kind of barrier against saying I did something and it was good.
yeah.
And I know that you've been really encouraging your family members to record these stories. What tips would you give to someone who's like, maybe my story is important and should be heard?
Yes, definitely. It's really interesting you say that, because that came across in a lot of the interviews that I listened to. On the Imperial War Museum has this incredible site. I just stumbled upon it because it wasn't easy to find, to be honest. And this guy from Durham University did all these interviews with the women who worked in shipyards, and he did it back in the 80s. So the women were only about 60s at the time, so their recall was really good. And it wasn't just Wearside, it was Tyneside as well. And I often go back and listen to them for my research, and they all are a little bit, you can tell, most of them are kind of a little bit perplexed as, why is it so important for them to be interviewed about this? That, there seems to be a like sort of low self-esteem going on with women, certainly at that stage, and I wonder still now to a certain extent. And sort of valuing ourselves really, and valuing our own history or lives. It doesn't you don't have to have done something that deserves to have a statue in Sunderland for, but just your life is important. What you've done, what your thoughts, what your feelings, and I just write it down and give it to the next generation. It's important.
It's really, really important. We're actually going to give away a copy of Nancy's book that's signed to someone who shares a story of a woman in Sunderland on any of our posts on Facebook. So if you have got a story and you're thinking, well, maybe it's worth sharing, share it now. Just pop it in the comments. But I think that one of the things that you've put your finger on there is that if a woman was talking to you about her experiences, she knows that that's going to be handled in a certain way with a kind of respect and safety. I remember listening to an oral history of someone who had an incredible life. She was a dinner lady who went on to run part of the council, and it was fascinating, but she really wanted to talk about recipes. She really wanted to talk about the food that she cooked, and the interviewer was a man and kept being like, but what about the admin? What about the civic function? And I just wanted to hear her talk about custard for as long as she wanted to talk about it. So fantastic. So yes, do share your stories. And I was just, something that I was also thinking about is we often talk about how Sunderland is more than wit and grit. We have that there's this external idea that it's just working class, it's just about being rugged. But your stories are about like a real emotional tenderness and a real care. And I wondered if you came up against any criticism for that, or if that was a bit of a struggle for you.
No, not quite the reverse, actually. No, not at all, which was, it has been said, it's certainly not been said to me. I mean, the feedback that I have had has been so wonderful, in the fact that that's the one thing that my readers seem to enjoy and relate to a certain extent. I think although the books are very much, what we've talked about, really it's the characters' thoughts and feelings and what they go through, and that's something as a writer that I really enjoy. I'm very interested in. So no, not at all actually. No, and I think the other thing that I hope I've achieved, and I feel like I have achieved from the feedback I've been getting, is that although it's set in that time, I do feel like all those emotions and thoughts and feelings relate still very much to today and women today and people today.
Yeah, it's feelings don't have an expiry date, do they? Yeah.
Exactly. And that, it's yes, and I don't think they change that much throughout the ages either. I think this is what we forget sometimes when we look back in history. We kind of have this image, it's a bit of a two-dimensional image, don't we, of what people were like during that time. And I think once you sort of, scrub and you see that picture underneath, you realize that there's not that much that's changed, especially when it comes to, the heart and the feelings and the thoughts.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Oh, Jay has been wonderful and has shared a link to Catherine Robertson's work. Jay is apparently our volunteer producer for the day. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jade. That's brilliant. Thank you.
What an absolute star. Before I let you go, I was just wondering if it wasn't Sunderland in World War II, what would you write about?
Or what if I was given a clean sort of sheet?
Has there been anything that sort of piqued your interest lately that you thought, well, I could write about Roman South Shields or
Oh, no, I don't think that's. I mean, I must admit, I've enjoyed writing about this period in history and Sunderland. But before I started writing, I was obviously a journalist for over 25 years. So I mean that's and worked very much on the sort of on the cliff face of the red tops. So I did. My life then was quite different to it is now, but I still have a great interest in that world, and I always say, you don't ever sort of not be a journalist. I mightn't be in it anymore, but it's still very much part of me. So I've still a big part of me is very much passionate about that side of things as well. Yeah, but I really don't know. It's like what we said before. I just I don't know. Hopefully next year I will know. When I finish writing the last book, hopefully I'll have a bit more of an idea. I hope so.
Amazing. No, that's exactly the right answer. Do put your stories of Sunderland women in the comments. Oh, we've got a couple of different posts on Facebook asking people to share, and we'll announce the winner in the next digital picnic, which will be on the 25th.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, go out and buy the next installment of the Shipyard Girls.
Well, if they do, I hope you enjoy it. And I always say to people, if you haven't started the series, try and start at the first book, because it does follow that sequence and that chronology, but also you really get to know the characters, so you kind of get you get that escapism which we all need at the moment.
Yeah, reading has been such a lifeline during lockdown. I'm sure that there will be lots of people out there who just wants a little bit of a comforting read.
Yeah.
And especially because I started on book number 1 on Monday, and I was like, I know where that is.
Yes, it's nice to know those familiar places.
Feeling of like, oh, it's like meeting a friend in a book. Yeah.
But funnily enough, there's a lovely guy called Ian Mowell, and before lockdown he started a Shipyard Girl walks in the town, and they've been really popular, where people have just enjoyed going around and seeing the places that I write about, but also he's very much involved, knows his history and his local history, and he's a professional tour guide as well, and so he tells them, obviously about these places that are in the book, but also he gives them a good background to the history of Sunderland as well. So fingers crossed, when we're through all of this, they'll be restarting again, and people can go have a little tour around Sunderland and get a little bit more knowledge.
That sounds like such a nice way to spend an afternoon.
Yeah, well, especially when we get some nice weather. Yes, fingers crossed.
Oh, you said it out loud now.
And then we could have a proper picnic.
Yeah, we'll have a Let's get with it. We'll have an analog picnic.
Yeah, yeah. With
Incorporated for a Shipyard Girl walk. Thank you so much, Nancy. I'll let you go there because I think we've managed to cover about 45 years of history.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. And it's really nice to be able to chat as well, and to chat about women's things and thoughts. And yeah, so yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, very, very welcome. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.